Conservative Party has a very short memory. We were at this point in 2022 after the kind of the collapse in support for Boris Johnson. They were looking to change the leader and thought they could change their fortunes by changing the leader. Rishi Sunak is that person who they put in place. So to do it again, the idea they're going to get a bump in fortunes based on doing that when they've already tried this twice already, I think is kind of for the birds, really.
Getting rid of Rishi Sunak won't save the Tories, according to polling for The Times today. Voters told the survey that they would not vote Conservative even if someone like Kemi Badenoch or Boris Johnson took over. Oliver Wright is The Times policy editor.
They asked people, would you like Sir Keir Starmer or would you like another Conservative leader who was able to cut taxes, take a much tougher line on small boats, get rid of illegal migration and bring down NHS waiting times? Now that was almost like a sort of polling which was your perfect prime minister. Who would you like? Who would be your dream prime minister? Rather than actually looking at the alternatives available, most notably Kemi Badenoch, who is talked about a lot as a potential successor should Sunak stand down before the next election. And interestingly, when people were presented with a real alternative to Sunak, was that actually they preferred Sunak and he would do better than Badenoch in any future general election. So I think it's kind of interesting because it shows that despite some Tory MPs thinking, all we need to do is change the leader, actually it may not be quite as straightforward as that.
OK, let's speak to Alain Tolhurst, chief reporter at Politics Home. Morning, Alan. Well, this is just one of the latest polls, some showing, dire ratings for the Conservatives and causing huge jitters amongst Tory MPs. Some of whom, at the moment, only a handful we know of, think the answer to it is to get rid of the PM.
Yeah, but I think it's interesting, as Oliver pointed out there, we had this poll that was in the Telegraph earlier this week suggesting that, it was rather kind of tendentious hypothetical, which was, would you rather have Rishi Sunak or would you rather have this kind of idealized Conservative leader that was going to fulfill all your fancies of what you think a Conservative leader was? And of course, people are like, oh yeah, of course I'd prefer that. But as this polling points out, that candidate doesn't really exist. That when you say, well, okay, well, if you want to get rid of Rishi Sunak, who are the alternatives? And it doesn't really shift the dial. And I think, the Conservative Party has a very short memory. We were at this point in 2022 after the kind of the collapse in support for Boris Johnson. They were looking to change the leader and thought they could change their fortunes by changing the leader. Rishi Sunak is that person who they put in place. So to do it again, the idea they're going to get a bump in fortunes based on doing that when they've already tried this twice already, I think is kind of for the birds, really. And so I think it kind of shows, after we saw Simon Clarke put his letter in and criticize the Prime Minister, we didn't see a lot of other rebels, even those we know that are critical of the Prime Minister, didn't go over the top with him, because I think they know that it's a bit of a forlorn mission now to try and get rid of Rishi Sunak and think that that's going to be the be-all and end-all to turn around their fortunes.
But do you think it will go away? I'm sure they'll absorb that reality. But of course, we've got a couple of by-elections coming up next month. Then, if it lasts as long as May, then, of course, there's the local elections. Two potential further drubbings, which may make them move, perhaps?
Yeah, I think so. Often when you do see these coups, they need a sort of an ignition point. And I think, obviously, by-election losses, even though, you can't always make a read across from a by-election result to a wider election result. But if they do lose both in Wellingborough and Kingswood, then I think that, that there will be further pushes. And as you say, that part of the reason why some people wanted an earlier election was to not have this kind of continual set of elections where the Conservatives are sort of damaged and wounded before leading up to a general election. And if the Conservatives do badly, as they did very badly in last year's local elections, then I think we will see this continue to be pushed. There's kind of a theory potentially that they could go after May, they could try and push Sunak out and then give whoever takes over 6 months until an election late into the autumn, into the winter. But again, I just do not see the kind of the support within the party to go through that turbulence again, even those, as I say, who are unhappy with the direction of travel under Sunak and want to see him. They'd rather try and push him in that direction than try and knock him out and put someone else in his place.
And, of course, the Conservative chair, Richard Holden, intimating, he was pretty explicit, wasn't he, that there will be a couple of tax cuts at least before the next election. Now, they're hoping that might do the trick.
Yes, and I think we know that's kind of the policy. That's partly why Number 10 has been always in favour of a later election, was to give them as much time as possible for changes to tax and the economy to take place to kind of try and turn around the economy and point to that as a reason to stick with the Conservatives. Yeah, I think it was a little bit revealing that Richard Holden sort of suggested that we'd see obviously that the budget in March and then potentially hinting at another event. I think Conservative sources kind of played it down and said that he was sort of talking more broadly about the progress and the direction of travel this year. But I think it's quite clear that that's the thinking within Number 10, the thinking within government, that they can perhaps give themselves enough time for another fiscal event in the autumn and then use that as a springboard with perhaps more tax cuts, perhaps around income tax potentially, and use that as a springboard to call an election in the autumn.
And, talking about the ideal Conservative leader, many, of course, have in their minds, I suppose, an amalgam between Winston Churchill and Margaret Thatcher would do. And mentioning Margaret Thatcher, it's a roundabout way of getting to this story about nuclear weapons. American nuclear weapons could return to the UK. Of course, we've got our own. But nuclear weapons, land-based weapons, could return to the UK. I think they were originally put in there, weren't they? Well, we all remember Greenham Common under Margaret Thatcher. The Telegraph has seen plans to upgrade RAF Lake and Heath in preparation.
Yeah, that base in Suffolk. Obviously, as you say, the weapons were based here in a kind of that Cold War throwback, and they were removed in 2008. And I think it's largely symbolic in the sense that the US does already have nuclear weapons stationed in Europe, in other countries actually closer to Russia than we are, really. But it would be symbolic of the kind of the growing threat that there is believed to be from Russia and elsewhere. Obviously, we've seen the continued action in the Red Sea, fighting off the Houthi rebels. And I think, yeah, it would be kind of symbolic. I think the Russians already suggested they would kind of retaliate, but it just kind of shows that this ratcheting up of tension, far from the fact that we thought that perhaps this war would either be over or be kind of on the downside. Now I think we are seeing that it's going to continue to be a pretty volatile 2024 in this kind of stuff, and yeah, this could be an extra kind of layer to that as we see this potential upgrades. We're not sure if it's definitely going to go through, but those plans are being put forward by the US government.
And Alan, lastly, a story. I mean, I know the government, and particularly Rishi Sunak, is under a lot of pressure, isn't he, to be seen to do something concrete, something demonstrable, something that you can say to the electorate, look, this is a problem that I've dealt with. This was the problem, and this is how we responded. And I'm referring to vapes. I mean, a lot of people are concerned particularly about the availability of vapes to younger people, and they're considering a new limit on vape flavours, ministers.
Yes, you're right. And Rishi Sunak, it's a pet kind of hate for him. He's a very anti-smoking. We know we're going to get the smoking bill probably coming through later this spring. Obviously announced in the autumn that he was going to try and ban smoking in the future for those under 14 already. And I think, yeah, there's a separate kind of piece of legislation in train, which is to ban single-use vapes, partly due to the kind of the big environmental issue that they create, but also there's kind of the feeling that having certain flavors clearly kind of aimed at a younger audience to try and attract teenagers to start vaping. And so yeah, there's going to be work to come in to do that. I think it's one of the things that we hear quite a lot from government, and as you say, it's something they want to point to. There's a lot of vested interests, a lot of big lobbyists in this space. I think the government's going to find it very difficult to get anything concrete past this side of an election, but clearly it is something that they want to try and do, to try and say, look, as you say, here's a problem that people have identified, parents have identified, schools have identified, and here's a solution that we're going to be able to do to it. But I think, as they're going to find with a lot of things, it's much harder to actually get it through and do the donkey work, get it passed in practice, than it is just to say, yeah, we'd love to, at a stroke, ban this kind of harmful thing.
You can say that again. Alan, thank you very much indeed. Pleasure to talk to you as always. Alain Tolhurst there from Politics Home.